Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today. This is the Bodega Cat Book Club, and we are going to continue on our reading on the Seth material by Jane Roberts. And today we'll be doing reading chapter 17. Okay, here we go. It's chapter 17, A Future Seth, Origin of the Sessions. By now, I was used to Seth. The sessions, so strange at first, were a familiar part of our lives. There was a lot I didn't understand. There still is. So I hope to develop my abilities more fully and to learn more. But I thought that the Seth sessions themselves would more or less remain the same. Looking back now at the earlier material, I can see that I should have known better. One night in April of 1968, we settled down for our usual Monday night session, unaware that anything new was about to happen. I sat in my rocker. Rob sat on the couch as usual, taking notes. According to Rob, Seth's voice was unusually powerful that night. My opened eyes were very dark, and Seth seemed to be watching Rob rather closely. Seth began the session, our 406th, by telling Rob the direction the material would take in following years. You have been given a sketchy outline, but we have time to fill it in, he said, smiling. For that matter, the outline itself is scarcely completed. We want to deal with the nature of reality as it exists within your camouflage system and within other systems, and to study the overall characteristics that pertain to it, regardless of any given materialization. Some of this material will automatically answer many questions with which you have been concerned, problems with which your scientists have been dealing. We will discuss the interrelationship that exists between all systems of reality, including certain points of contact that include them all. These various points can be mathematically deduced, and will in some future of yours serve as contact points, taking the place of space travel in some cases. This material ran several pages as Seth discussed the future content of our sessions. Right after this, we took our first break. Neither of us realized, even at this point, that the session would be any different from the usual. As soon as we resumed, however, I suddenly felt a powerful surge of energy flow through me, so that inside it, I seemed almost lost and swept away. I couldn't tell Rob what I was experiencing, of course, but he began to suspect that something was happening. Seth became very emphatic, watching Rob closely for one thing. For another, Seth began to stress each word. If you keep these channels open and free, you will get material that is as undistorted as possible, he said. Rupert's range is an excellent one, and the plane of reality in which I have my existence is far beyond those to which persons in the physical system usually have access. You and he must see to it that Rupert does not color his experiences through reading material that is distorted. This kind of material has its purposes, but it does do some good. And it does do some good, explaining reality in terms that people can understand. For the props and the fantasies are familiar ones. There is no necessity for them here, however. He continued, suggesting that I stay away from books that deal exclusively with conventional religious subjects, interpreting reality in those limited terms. At this point, Rob became aware of the new and rather odd energy in Seth's voice as his delivery grew more powerful. My open eyes were very dark. Rob began to look up whenever he could snatch a moment from note-taking. Seth said, "We will make an effort in the future to give you both some direct experience in concepts. These experiments will run along with and closely follow the vocalized expression of the concepts involved. They will give you some small glimmering of the unfortunate but necessary loss of meaning that occurs when any concept must be communicated in physical terms. This will be a different kind of in-depth learning, a rather unique and original development that will be as devoid as possible of stereotypes print symbols, which are usually almost automatically superimposed on such experiences. Do you understand?" "Yes," Rob said. But he spoke almost automatically. The delivery had quickened, and he was having trouble keeping up with the notes. Later, we were to read the above paragraph over many times when, as you'll see shortly, I found myself almost in over my head. Seth's voice continued to get stronger. I am the Seth that I say that I am, and I am also more. The Seth personality that is part of me is the portion that can most clearly communicate with you. Do you follow me? Rob nodded. Yes, he said again. The Seth portion of me has been intimately connected with you both, and so in that respect have I. This is closely related to the definition of a personality energy essence, from which, of course, all personalities spring. The voice became even more powerful. Rob thought of asking Seth to slow down, but he wasn't sure what was happening and thought it best not to interrupt. There is a particular corner within Rupert's personality, also deflected into your own, that allows him rather clear access to informational channels most difficult to reach from your system. During this session at this moment, the contact is particularly good. There is also access to energy far beyond that which is usually experienced. Rupert sensed this in the past and feared to open these channels until he felt himself suitably ready. There exists what could almost be compared to a psychological and psychic warp in dimensions, and that corner of Rupert's personality is an apex point at which communication and contact can take place. Then, to Rob's surprise, Seth told him to end the session. Rob was to follow the procedure given recently to end my trance. Just lately, I had begun going into particularly deep trances compared to earlier ones, and Seth has suggested that Rob call my name 3 times. Seth said, this evening you have reached somewhat beyond the personality by which I usually make myself known to you, even if I continue to speak. End the trance. Rob called me several times, getting no response. Then he touched my shoulder and I jumped rather violently. This interrupted the trance state. I didn't know what was going on either. The powerful energy kept flowing through me. If I stood up, I felt as if I'd go flying through the wall, propelled by this force. My head felt huge, as if my ears were out several feet. This last sensation wasn't new. I'd had it in some psych time experiences, but trying to contain that energy was something else. I shook my head. Wow, if I ever had any doubts, whatever's going on, it's not coming from me, not from my own personality. Later in my own notes, I wrote, tremendous energy seemed to flow through me, with the definite certainty, thank God, that this was coming from beyond me and was automatically translated into words at my end. I feel this is as significant a development, almost, as the original Seth session. The sense of contact was undeniably there. The feeling I had was that I really was in touch with some all-encompassing reality. The next Wednesday night, I was somewhat hesitant as session time approached. We began at the dot of 9, but instantly Rob knew that this wasn't going to be a normal session. For one thing, the voice was different. It was much more like my own voice, yet it wasn't mine. Seth's deep tones, his gestures, and characteristic way of using words, these were absent. The voice was much softer than usual. Rob had to listen closely to get all the words. The development in the last session was latent from our first session, but it was a development that could or could not have occurred. Had it not, then many important future developments would have been blocked. The points where the Seth voice was loudest and most powerful, these points often represented openings through which the development could occur. For various reasons, however, the method was not used. The energy would have diverted from the voice in which it had already been built up, you see. The voice became lighter, almost lilting. The laws of the inner universe, which have been given to us by Seth, are not lost in some book. They are attempts to explain in words the nature of inner reality. I must disentangle concepts, unravel them in order to explain them, and much is necessarily lost in the process. I intend to implement this material whenever possible by helping both of you achieve subjective experiences that will fill out the words for you. These will vary according to conditions that are much more possible now after the session's latest development. Each simple law of the inner universe that I have given you is in actuality a small, inadequate statement in single-dimensional terms. Yet it is more than most are given, and the best approximation that can be made of the basic facts beneath any existence, the best statement that can be made under the circumstances with which we must work. As words would give a small hint of the reality of color or sound to someone who did not experience these, so words can only give insight into the nature of reality. I hope through the addition of subjective experiences of various kinds to give you the feel of concepts when possible. The inner senses, to some extent, will allow you to perceive the reality of inner existence. In this new development, Rupert is using these in a more effective manner than before. There are some changes in the way connections are made. This gives Rupert a feeling of strangeness. I'm only giving excerpts here, but through these passages, the voice became even more lilting and neuter. Finally, it stabilized, high, clear, distant, and unemotional. The Seth personality has been an intermediary and a legitimate one. The information already given to you regarding the nature of personality gestalts should make this development seem a fitting one. Seth is what I am, yet I am more than Seth is. Seth is, however, independent and continues to develop as I do in the spacious present we both exist. Some material he can present to you more clearly than I. Rob looked up sharply this time. If Seth wasn't speaking, who was? While I was the source of the material in the last sessions, Seth, as you think of him, was at times a silent partner, helping Rupert make the proper translations, while stepping aside in a personal manner. Earlier, in previous sessions, Seth interpreted material from me so that Rupert could receive it. You say rest. Seth will always be an element in these sessions as you know him. He is the connective between us, and he has been a part of me that I have sent out to you. He has participated willingly. Here we had a break, and I came out of trance easily enough. This also gave me the opportunity to tell Rob something that happened just before the session started. I got the feeling that the cone came down just over my head. I got the feeling that a cone came down just over my head. I didn't think that an actual physical cone was there, but the idea of shape was definite. The wide end was about the size of my head with a narrow part on top like a pyramid. Since then, I've had this cone effect often, always in this kind of a session. Right after the session resumed, I began to feel the tremendous energy again as the new voice spoke. You have always been in contact with me, and you were only able to see a portion of me. Keep in mind that all names are arbitrary, and we use them merely for your convenience. Basically, Seth's name or mine isn't important. Individuality is important and continues in ways you do not suspect. In the most important way, and in the only basic way, I am Seth, dispensing with certain characteristics which are mine, which I use to contact you. The Seth personality, again, is legitimate and independent and is a part of my identity. Seth is learning as I am. Simply as an analogy, you could call me a future Seth, Seth in a higher stage of development. This is not to be taken literally, however, since both of us are fully independent and exist simultaneously. There are reasons why these particular connections have been made. There are events that unite us and that have served as turning points in the development of our various personalities. In some strange manner, what I am now is linked to what you are. There are points of contact having nothing to do with time, as you know it. There are significant to our personalities. Origins of new energy that are sometimes brought into existence because of the strong latent psychic capabilities within individual selves, psychic capacities within individual selves. At these points, whole conglomerates of new self units came into being. The origin sparked, as given in the last sentence. They then disperse and go their own ways, but the mutual origin and the strength of that initial psychic birth remain. In here, I had inner images as of stars being, in here, I have visual inner images as of stars being born, an attempt, I thought, to put the data into recognizable visual terms. These personalities may develop in entirely different fashions and in various dimensions, but a strong sympathetic attraction exists between them. There is a point of contact where knowledge can be communicated from these various dimensions, and for too many reasons to give you now, Rupert is in proper coordinates for such communications to take place. This communication, while taking place in your time, is nevertheless responsible in other dimensions for what you would call future developments in your own personalities, which you can in turn contact. I look back on you as the cells from which I sprang. Yet I am more than the sum of what you will be when you are finished with the dimensions and times that I have known. For I have sprung entirely away from you and would be alien in your terms. That you can even contact me is a most remarkable development. Yet had you not been able to contact me, I would not be what I am. Here the voice was very distant, high and clear, so unlike the usual Seth voice that Rob was still rather taken aback. I'm more, however, than this portion of me that you contact. But it is only one portion of me that experiences that reality. It is highly important then that this material is not distorted, that this material not be distorted. For most communications take place on far different levels than this. Levels so closely connected with your own system that even the most undistorted data is highly distorted because the communicators themselves do not realize that they create the realities which they then describe. I have done my best to give you an understanding as a basis for future sessions. Seth, as you knew him, will also be Seth as you know him. But whether or not I speak as myself or through him, he is still the intermediary and the connection between us. More, he will still appear as you have known him. There are necessary emotional elements that are uniquely his own. My personality structure is far different, very rewarding to me, but unfamiliar to you. I do not want you to feel that I have taken away a friend. I'm also a friend. In many ways, I'm the same friend. Other portions of me are concerned elsewhere, for I am aware of my own existence in other dimensions and keep track of them and direct my many selves. When the session was over, Rob and I sat up talking. It's crazy, I said. When we have a usual Seth session, I sort of feel Seth take over, though I don't like that term. With this personality, though, I go somewhere out of myself and seem to make contact with it in some nowhere, leaving my body empty. I don't know how I get there, wherever it is, or how I get back. Rob nodded. Both of us felt almost sad in one way. I think we were afraid that our regular Seth sessions were over and that the new ones would take their place. Besides, Rob said, what do we call this new personality? We knew it was meaningless, basically, but we felt we needed a name, a label. And how exactly was this new personality different from Seth? What could it do that Seth couldn't? I wish it were more masculine or feminine, I said. A neuter personality seems so strange. Some of our questions were answered in the next session, our 419th on June 8th, 1968. Just before the session started, I began to get the pyramid effect again. I grinned, somewhat embarrassed, moving so that I sat directly beneath where I felt the pyramid had come down. When the session started, a friend, Pat Norelli, attended. I have told you who we are. We are Seth, and whenever we have spoken, we have been known as Seth. The entity had its beginning before the emergence of your time. It was instrumental with many other entities in the early formation of energy into physical form. We are not alone in this endeavor, for through your centuries, other entities like us have also appeared and spoken. Our entity is composed of multitudinous selves with our own identities, many of whom have worked in this behalf. Their messages will always be basically the same, though the times and circumstances of their communications may differ and be colored accordingly. We taught a man to speak before the tongue knew syllables. We adopt whatever personality characteristics seem pertinent. For in our own personality, we have a bank of complete inner selves, and we are all Seth. We attempt to translate realities into terms that you can comprehend. We change our face and form, but we're always the one. Many of us have not been born in flesh, as I have not been. In one way, we have seeded ourselves through endless universes. Physically, you would find me a mass smaller than a brown nut, for my energy is so highly concentrated. It exists in intensified mass, perhaps like one infinite cell existing in endless dimensions at once and reaching out from its own reality to all others. Yet in such a small mass, these intensities contain memories and experiences electromagnetically, sorry, little tongue twister there, electromagnetically, there you go, coiled one within the other through which I can travel. Even as I can travel through other selves, which I have known and which are a portion of my identity, and yet which are so beautifully unpredetermined, for you do not exist as completed personalities within my memory, but you grow within my memory. You grow through my memory as a tree grows up through space. And my memory changes as you change. My memory of you includes your probable selves. And all of these coordinates exist simultaneously in a point that takes up no space. I told you that Rupert's personality acts like a warp in dimensions. In certain coordinates, it exists at particular points that serve as entryways. The personality in general is formed from components existing in many realities and is an apex point. A window cannot see through itself, but you can see through a window. So Rupert's personality is transparent in that respect. The next session showed us how different this new development could be. It also nearly scared me out of my wits, at least for a few moments. More than this, however, it opened our eyes to new possibilities of experience and demonstrated yet another phenomenon that could occur within this session framework. Our friend, Phil, the salesman I spoke of earlier, dropped in that evening. We began at 9 p.m. as usual. Seth spoke to Phil about some business matters and answered several questions that had been on Phil's mind. During our rest period, however, I felt the now familiar pyramid effect, and when we resumed, the other personality began to speak. The transition from Seth's deep voice and lively gestures was very startling to Phil, who hadn't heard the other personality speak before. Now my body was almost puppet-like, and my face was devoid of expression. Just before the voice began to speak, I felt my consciousness drawn up through the invisible pyramid like a draft up a flute. Draft up a flute. F-L-U-E. What does that mean? There was no indication that anything else was about to happen, however. The voice said, "You are like children with a game, and you think that the game is played by everyone. Physical life is not the rule. Identity and consciousness existed long before your earth was formed. You see physical bodies and suppose that any personality must appear in physical forms, in physical terms. Consciousness is the source. Consciousness is the force behind matter, and it forms many other realities besides the physical one. It is only because your own viewpoint is presently so limited that it seems to you that physical reality is the rule and mode of existence. The source and power of your present consciousness has never been physical. And where I am, many are not even aware that such a physical system exists. The physical system is an illusion, but you must accept it and from its viewpoint try to understand the realities that exist beyond it. The illusions are real since they exist. Your reality is simply not one that I have pursued, and one of the purposes of my participation in these sessions is to acquaint the one called Rupert with inner travel. He must leave the physical system, and in doing so, set up habits and paths that can be used to advantage. No one thought anything in particular about that last statement until later that night. The voice continued for a short time, and I encountered some difficulty getting back. I felt suspended in darkness somewhere far above, but I was also aware that Seth was close by. A few minutes passed. Suddenly, Seth came through loud and clear. The contrast between the two personalities was so marked that even Rob was startled. Seth started to joke. Now that Big Brother has had his way, I will bring our Rupert back to you. I came out of trance easily enough since Seth came through. We sat chatting for a few moments, and then the session resumed, letting me in for one of the most remarkable experiences of my life. This is rather difficult to describe, so first I'll quote what the other voice was saying. The inner portions of your own identity and reality are not known to you, for you cannot objectify them, and therefore you do not perceive them. So much of your energy is used in these physical productions that you cannot afford to perceive any reality but your own. Again, like children playing with blocks, your focus of attention is upon physical blocks. Other shapes and forms that you could perceive, you do not. Even in explaining other realities to you, I must use the word shapes and forms, or you would not understand me. You have your mathematics from us, a shadow of true mathematics. For here again, you have insisted upon hemming in realities. Your idea of progress is building larger blocks. Yet some of us would think of kicking aside your block constructions in ire, or telling you to put aside your children's toys, though one day you will do so. Later in your time, all of you will look down into the physical system like giants peering through small windows at the others, now in your position, and smile. But you will not want to stay, crawl through small enclosures. We protect such systems. Our basic and ancient knowledge and energy automatically reaches out to nourish all systems that grow. Here, I screamed and started shaking violently. Rob thought that my heavy rocker was about to tip over. Rob and Phil leaped to their feet, Phil knocking his glass of beer to the floor in the process. Rob rubbed my hands and tried to get me out of trance. This time, I'm quoting from my own notes made later that evening. When the personality compared physical reality with children's blocks, he made a remark about individuals returning in our future to peer into physical reality like giants, squinting down to watch children play with blocks upon the floor. As the voice spoke, my eyes were closed, of course, and I don't remember what the voice said, but have checked Rob's verbatim notes of the session. In here, someplace, suddenly I saw a giant's face peer into our living room, its face filling up the entire window. The next moment, my own body, the room and everything in it began to grow to tremendous size. My body became massive. I could feel the organs inside me grow. At the same time, all the furniture, everything got larger and larger. It seemed as if the room now was huge enough to cover all of the city, yet everything expanded in proportion, retaining its usual shape. I didn't feel as if this were happening. To me, it was happening, literally. I simply panicked and started yelling. It took Rob some minutes to get me out of trance, but by then I was ashamed of myself. I felt like a real coward. Rob was worried about me and wondered if I should continue with the sessions. But by now I was really embarrassed at making such a fuss, and I knew that the experience was significant. I went back into trance, and very soon I was to break off again. Here are a few quotes from Rob's notes just before the session resumed. I hope this was the end of the session, but it was obvious that Jane wanted to continue, or at least was willing to continue in spite of the unsettling experience. I tried to talk her out of it, but her eyes kept closing. I'm on my way up to the other guy, she says. I just passed Seth and he joked with me. Something about a massive experience. Why don't you just come back down? I asked. I don't know how to, she said. 10:55, Jane resumed in the now familiar, high, distant, very formal voice. The blocks of physical reality appear very real to you when you dwell within their perspective. Your Rupert experienced a transmigration of systems. It was not meant to be unpleasant. This was his subjective interpretation. First, he was involved in a microscopic adventure. Consciousness does not take up space. You must understand this. Then he re-entered your own system of physical blocks, and by contrast, that system then appeared huge and monstrous. When we make contact, his consciousness and personality in concentrated form make a journey, in your terms, like a speck in space, the consciousness reduced to its essence. And from his experience, we let him fall back into the physical system. The children's blocks then became massive by contrast. This was an experience in concepts. During the above monologue, my subjective experiences continued. Again, I wasn't aware of what the voice was saying, and only afterward did I realize that my experiences paralleled the meaning of the passages. Here are a few quotes from my notes. I started to feel the microscopic nature of our physical universe, comparatively speaking. This is most difficult to put into words. There was a momentary sense of dissolution accompanying this, my own, I think. I'm always aware of the pyramid shape above me just before this personality speaks. Usually I go up through it. This time, though, at the narrow end far above me, I saw the same giant head peering down at me, and the room peering down at me in the room as through a microscope. If the room had everything in it, was going to shrink as realistically as it had expanded earlier, and it was, I could tell. I just wasn't ready for the experience. I tried to find my voice to tell Rob I wanted to end the session, but the other personality was using it. Through all of this, I used the word I, but I was so a part of the action that it was difficult to separate myself from it. Now, wanting out, I tried again to use my own voice. This time, I found myself, pulled myself together, and found my vocal cords while the other personality paused for a moment. It was just about here that I saw the giant face peering down through the pyramid above me. In the earlier episode, I screamed involuntarily. In the second, I found that there were ways of finding my own voice and ending the experience. With Seth, such a question never arose. There was no pressure put upon me by the other personality to continue the experience, but I had to learn how to terminate it myself when I wanted to. I don't believe the other personality understood that the experience was unpleasant for me, or for that matter, that such terms had any meaning for it. Information was being given in certain terms, period, as far as it was concerned. I don't even know if it was aware of my reactions. Very startling, though, the whole thing. If a psychologist wants to say simply that the whole thing was hallucination, then he would have to admit that it was hardly random, but well directed to a point and for a purpose. The merging of myself with the action in the expansion mode was frightening at first. All in all, I guess I reacted well enough and brought the thing to an end in the second episode when I decided I'd had enough for one night. I wasn't just tossed willy-nilly the second time, and I broke the trance in anticipation of the experiences I knew were coming. So I did learn from the first episode. That session was well over a year ago. Our usual Seth session still continued, and only now and then does this other personality speak. We refer to it as Seth 2. Often these sessions involve me in some kind of subjective experience, though now I'm learning how to handle myself when this happens. Once during a rest period, for example, Rob wondered what it was like to be non-physical. When the session resumed, I felt myself seemingly suspended, fully alert and aware, but bodiless in space. I had no form as far as I knew, but I possessed complete freedom of motion. Something like conscious air. This time I wasn't frightened, realizing that we were getting an answer to Rob's question. During this experience, the motionless, lilting, distant voice explained what non-physical existence was like. The difference in the two personalities was particularly apparent in a recent ESP class session in which Seth was at his jovial best, showing personal interest in each student. As usual during such times, my face was extremely animated, and Seth's characteristic gestures were quite noticeable. After speaking to each student individually for a moment, Seth said with a touch of humor, I come here, I hope, as an endearing personality with characteristics to which you can relate. Now, these characteristics are mine, and I am who I say I am. And yet, the Seth that you know is but a small portion of my reality. the part that has been physical and can understand your problem. But beyond that, the self, there is another self and still another self of which I'm fully aware. And to that self, physical reality is like a breath of smoke in air. And that self does not need the characteristics that you know and think of as mine. The voice had been vibrant and full, booming and loud. Then there was a pause. And for the first time, the other personality came through in class. All of Seth's gestures and mannerisms vanished. Instantly, that high, distant, asexual voice began to speak. It is almost musical, without inflection, like single notes. And that self tells you that there is a reality beyond human reality, an experience that cannot be verbal nor translated in human terms. Although this type of experience may seem cold to you, it is a clear and crystal-like existence in which no time is needed for experience, in which the inner self condenses all human knowledge that has been received through various existences and reincarnations. For all this has been coded and exists indelibly. You also exist now within this reality. Know that within your physical atoms, now the origins of all consciousness still sing, and that all the human characteristics by which you know yourself still exist. So I am the Seth that is beyond the Seth that you know. And in me, the knowledge and vitality of that Seth still rings. In your terms, I am a future Seth, and the terms are meaningless to me. We gave you mental images, and upon these images, you learn to form the world that you grow. We gave you the pattern by which your physical selves are formed. We gave you the patterns, intricate, involved, and blessed, from which you form the reality of each physical thing that you know. The most minute cell within your brain has been made of patterns of consciousness, which we have given you. The entire web work was initiated by us. We taught you to form the reality that you know. End of chapter 17. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed that. It seems like every chapter is so complicated and convoluted. It's a mind twister, isn't it? Okay, I hope you have a great week, and we will continue the next chapter next week. In the meantime, have a wonderful day or night or wherever you are. Okay, bye-bye now.